I never thought I would see my child suffer the way he did. No mother is ever ready for that kind of pain. The hospital walls felt colder than ice. Each beep of the monitor echoed like a countdown in my ears. I prayed harder than ever before, but with every prayer came the fear of losing him. People said I was strong, but inside I was breaking. This is my story, a mother's painful fight, and the night that changed everything forever. When I look back now, it almost feels like another lifetime. Back then, life felt simple. Our home was not big, but it was warm. It was full of laughter. I lived with my little boy, Ian. He was 6 years old at the time. His smile could light up the darkest room. His laugh could heal the heaviest heart. Every morning, he would run into my room. "Wake up, Mama," he would shout with joy. And I would pull him close, bury my face in his messy hair, and remind myself that he was the best thing that had ever happened to me. I worked long hours in a small office. The pay was not much, but it was enough to put food on the table, and enough to buy Ian his favorite little toys from the market. He loved cars. He had a small red toy car that never left his hand. He even slept with it beside his pillow. Evenings were our favorite time together. We would sit in the kitchen. I would cook rice and curry, and he would sit on a little stool, telling me about his day at school. Every story he told was full of wonder, as if the world was magical when seen through his eyes. Sometimes, when I was tired, I would just watch him talk, his little hands moving in the air, his eyes shining with excitement, and I would whisper inside my heart, "Please God, protect this child, keep him safe." On weekends, we would go to the park. He loved chasing the pigeons. He would laugh so hard that people around us would smile too. I would sit on a bench, holding his jacket in my lap, watching him run, and thinking, this is happiness, this is life. My family lived nearby. We were not very rich, but we had each other. On Sundays, we would gather at my mother's house, big pots of food on the stove, children running around, the air filled with laughter and the smell of spices, and my boy always in the center of it, always the one making everyone laugh. He was my pride, my light, my reason for waking up every single day. But even in those happy times, there were small cracks, things I noticed, but chose to ignore. Sometimes Ian would cough a little too hard at night. I thought it was just the cold weather. I would cover him with a blanket, kiss his forehead, and whisper, "It's nothing, you'll be fine by morning." Sometimes he would get tired more quickly than other children. After running for a while, he would sit down and say, "Mama, I'm tired." And I would laugh softly. "You just need to eat more, grow stronger." And then I would cook him his favorite meal to cheer him up. I didn't want to believe anything could be wrong. I told myself it was just normal. Children get sick sometimes. They get tired. It was nothing to worry about. But deep inside, a small voice whispered, "Pay attention, something is not right." I pushed that voice away because the truth was I was scared. Scared of not being able to protect him. Scared of not being strong enough if something bad happened. At night, after he fell asleep, I would sometimes stand by his bed, watching his little chest rise and fall, counting every breath, as if making sure he was really there, as if making sure nothing could take him away from me. And yet life went on. Work, school, family dinners. The days were ordinary and full of love. I thought our little world was safe. I thought nothing could break us. I thought the bond between me and my son was too strong to ever be touched. But I was wrong. Something was coming. Something that would shatter our ordinary days. Something that would test me, not as a woman, not as a worker, but as a mother. That night, when I first noticed the way Ian's breathing changed, I didn't know it was the beginning of a storm that would tear through everything I thought was safe and leave me fighting for the very life of my child. The days after that night felt normal again, or maybe I wanted them to feel normal. Ian went to school each morning, his red toy car tucked safely in his pocket. He ran to his friends at the school gate and turned back once, just once, to wave at me with that innocent smile. That smile kept me going. It gave me strength on the hardest days at work, when the hours were long and the pay too small. I held on to that little wave in my memory and reminded myself why I worked so hard. After school, he would sit at the table with his books. He never loved homework. He would pout and tap his pencil. "Mama, can't we play first?" And I would sigh, but then laugh and let him play for 10 more minutes before homework. He was clever, quick to learn, full of curiosity. He asked questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Why do birds fly, but we don't? Why do you have to go to work every day, Mama? And I answered each question with patience, even when I was tired, because I wanted him to believe the world was magical, that it was full of answers waiting to be found. At night, we would read stories together. His favorite was always about heroes. Heroes who fought monsters. Heroes who never gave up. And sometimes he would whisper before sleep, "Mama, one day, I'll be your hero too." And I would kiss his forehead and whisper back, "You already are." Our bond was unshakable. At least that's what I believed. But slowly, very slowly, little cracks showed themselves again. There were days when he came home from school, and his face was pale, his steps slower. I would ask, "Are you okay, Ian?" And he would nod quickly. "Just tired, Mama." I wanted to believe him. But sometimes, when he thought I wasn't looking, he held his chest, as if catching his breath. One evening, while playing in the park, he ran after the pigeons like always, but this time he stopped halfway, bent over, and coughed until tears came to his eyes. I rushed to him, held him in my arms. "Are you all right? Tell me." He nodded weakly. "Just need water, Mama." My heart ached, but I told myself it was nothing serious. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe the air was too dusty that day. I convinced myself, because the truth was too frightening to face. At family gatherings, my sisters would sometimes notice, "Why does he look so tired?" They would whisper, and I would laugh it off. "Oh, you know children, they play too much, that's all." But deep inside, I felt their unspoken worry, their silent glances at me, as if they saw what I was trying not to see. At work, my boss grew impatient with my absences. "Again? You have to leave early again," he asked sharply one day. And I lowered my head. "I need to pick up my son." He sighed loudly, and I felt the sting of guilt. But nothing mattered more than being there for Ian. Money grew tighter. Hospital bills had not started yet, but even small medicines for his cough cost more than I could afford. I cut back on everything. New clothes for me? Never. Extra sweets for the house? No more. Every coin saved was for him, because he came first, always. And yet, even with all the sacrifices, there were nights when I lay in bed, unable to sleep, listening to his breathing, counting the seconds between each breath, terrified of what might come. But by morning, he would wake me with his smile. "Mama, I'm hungry." And just like that, I pushed the fear away again. One night, I remember clearly, the power had gone out. The house was dark. We sat with a candle on the table, and Ian whispered softly, "Mama, are you scared of the dark?" I smiled and shook my head. "No, my love. I'm not scared because you're with me." He leaned against me, holding his toy car, and whispered back, "Don't worry, Ma. Even if monsters come, I'll protect you." Tears filled my eyes, because I knew I was the one who had to protect him, and I wasn't sure if I was strong enough. That night, I couldn't sleep, because the truth I had been hiding from myself was becoming too loud to ignore. Something was wrong with my child, something bigger than a simple cough. And I knew our simple, happy days were about to change forever. Days passed, weeks passed, and slowly the little signs became harder to ignore. Ian began to get tired more quickly. He no longer ran as fast as before, no longer laughed as loudly. Sometimes he chose to sit quietly, holding his toy car. Instead of playing football with his friends, I asked him one evening, "Why don't you play with them anymore?" He looked at me with those innocent eyes and whispered, "They run too fast now, Mama, and I get tired too soon." My heart broke, but I forced a smile. "You don't have to be fast, you just have to be happy." He nodded, but deep down, I knew he wasn't telling me everything. At night, when the house was quiet, I sometimes heard him coughing in his sleep, a soft cough at first, then stronger, longer, until I rushed to his side and rubbed his back until he calmed. He would open his sleepy eyes and whisper, "Sorry, Mama, I didn't want to wake you." And I would hold him tight, wishing I could take the pain instead of him. The school also began to notice. One day his teacher called me. She said softly, "He looks pale in class. He often lays his head on the desk. I think you should take him to a doctor." Her words struck me like thunder. I tried to smile, tried to act calm, but inside, my chest tightened with fear. I made excuses at work, left early one afternoon, and took Ian to a small clinic. The doctor listened to his chest, checked his pulse, and frowned silently. The silence felt heavier than words. Finally, the doctor spoke. "It could be nothing serious, but I think you should do more tests at the hospital." I nodded quickly, but inside I was screaming, because I knew this was the beginning of something I wasn't ready for. That night, as I tucked Ian into bed, he looked at me with sleepy eyes. "Mama, why are you sad?" I froze, forced another smile. "I'm not sad, just tired." He reached out his small hand, placed it on my cheek, and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll be strong for you." Tears burned my eyes, but I waited until he was asleep before I let them fall. Family gatherings were no longer the same. Everyone noticed Ian's thinness, his slower steps, his pale face, but no one said it out loud. They asked me quietly in the kitchen, "Have you taken him to a doctor?" And I nodded. "Yes, soon, don't worry." But their eyes told me they already worried. At work, things grew harder. My boss had little patience left. "You're distracted, always leaving early, you must choose your job or your excuses." I wanted to shout, to tell him my child was not an excuse, but instead I lowered my head because I needed this job. For food, for medicine, for everything. That night, as I walked home holding Ian's small hand, he looked up at me and said, "Mama, why do you always look tired?" And I froze again, because I couldn't tell him the truth. That every breath he took was my worry, that every cough felt like a knife in my chest. Instead, I smiled and whispered, "Because I love you too much, and love makes people tired sometimes." He laughed softly and said, "Then you must love me a lot." I hugged him tightly and whispered, "More than anything in the world." But the signs grew stronger. One morning, as he was getting ready for school, he fainted, just like that. His small body crumbled to the ground. I screamed his name, "Ian," and lifted him in my arms. His eyes fluttered open slowly, and he whispered, "I'm fine, Mama, don't cry." But I was already crying, holding him close, knowing this was not fine at all. I stayed awake all night after that, listening to his breath, watching his chest rise and fall, afraid that if I closed my eyes, I might lose him. The next morning, I decided, no more waiting, no more pretending. I would take him to the hospital, no matter what it cost me, no matter how much I had to sacrifice, because his life was worth everything. That night, as he held his toy car close to his chest, he whispered one last thing before sleep. "Mama, if I get better, can we go to the sea? I want to see the waves." My throat tightened. I kissed his forehead and whispered back, "Yes, my love, we will go to the sea. I promise." But deep inside, I feared promises might not be enough. The hospital smelled of disinfectant, cold walls, white lights, silence broken only by machines. I held Ian's hand tightly. He was so small in that big chair, swinging his legs nervously, but he tried to smile, tried to look brave for me. The doctor examined him carefully, listened to his heartbeat, ordered tests, so many tests, blood tests, x-rays, scans. Each one felt like a hammer on my chest. While waiting, Ian leaned against me. "Mama, do you think it's serious?" he asked softly. I froze. My heart screamed yes, but my lips whispered no. "It's nothing, my love, just some tests." He nodded, trusting me completely, and that trust cut me deeper than any blade. When the results came, the doctor's face turned heavy. He spoke slowly, carefully. "There is something wrong with his lungs. It could be a chronic illness. He will need treatment, long treatment." The words echoed in my ears. Chronic illness, treatment. Each word burned like fire. I felt the room spin. I clutched Ian's small hand tighter and nodded. "Yes, we will do everything." But inside, I wondered, how? The medicines were expensive, the tests endless. The doctor gave me a list of what Ian needed, and each item looked like a mountain I could not climb. That night, I sat in my small kitchen, bills spread out before me, my head in my hands, tears soaking the paper. How could one woman on one small salary carry this weight? I thought of asking for help, but pride stopped me. What would people say? That I was begging? That I couldn't care for my own child? Yet the truth was cruel. I couldn't do this alone. The next day, I visited my sister. She looked at me with worried eyes, and before I could even speak, she hugged me tightly. "Tell me, what's happening with Ian?" And I broke down. The words poured out with tears. The sickness, the tests, the money, all of it. She held my hand and whispered, "You don't have to do this alone." Her words gave me strength, but also shame, because I wanted to be enough, just me and my son. Back at home, Ian asked me innocently, "Mama, why are you crying today?" I wiped my face quickly and smiled weakly. I wasn't crying. I just got dust in my eyes. He giggled softly. "You're silly, Mama." And I laughed too, even though my heart was breaking. Days at the hospital became routine. Blood tests, medicines, waiting in long lines. Ian grew quieter, no longer asking about the sky or the birds, just holding my hand silently, trusting me to lead the way. At work, my boss's patience ended. "You can't keep leaving. This company is not a charity." His words were sharp, cruel, but I had no choice. I left early again, because my child needed me more than my boss ever could. Money ran out faster each week. I sold my jewelry, sold furniture, even sold my wedding ring. Each item gone, but nothing mattered, because all I cared about was keeping Ian alive. At night, I sometimes sat by his bed, watching him sleep, and whispered prayers into the dark. Please God, don't take him from me. Take everything else, but not him. And sometimes when his breathing grew heavy, I leaned close, terrified of losing him before the morning came. The neighbors began to whisper. Some showed pity, others judgment. Poor woman, raising a sick child alone. Their words stabbed me, but I kept walking with my head down, because I didn't need their pity. I needed strength. One afternoon, Ian asked me quietly, Mama, am I dying? My heart stopped. I pulled him close and whispered fiercely,
No.
Don't ever say that. You are my life. You are my everything. He looked into my eyes, as if searching for truth, and then nodded softly. Okay, Mama. But I knew. He already sensed more than I told him. The sea trip he once dreamed of felt far away now. Too far. Yet sometimes he still asked, Mama, when I'm better, will we still go? And I smiled through tears. Yes, my love, we will go. I promise. But promises felt fragile, like glass ready to break. And so, our happy life that once felt normal had turned into endless hospital visits, silent dinners, sleepless nights, and fear that lived in every corner of our home. The bond between us was still strong, but it was no longer filled with laughter alone. It was now tied with pain, with worry, with a mother's desperate fight to save her child from a battle he never chose. And deep inside, I felt something was about to break, not just inside him, but inside me too. The hospital visits became heavier each week. Bills piled higher and higher, and my hands shook each time I opened the envelopes. I told myself I would find a way. I always found a way, because a mother must. So I turned to my family. My sister gave what little she could. She shared her savings, held my hand, and whispered, Don't give up. Ian needs you strong. Her kindness gave me hope, but not everyone was kind. I went to my brother one evening. I swallowed my pride, knocked on his door, and asked quietly, Please, Ian needs treatment. Can you help with some money? He looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. I wish I could, but business is bad. I can't afford it. My heart sank. I nodded. Of course, I understand. But when I left, I heard his wife whisper from inside. She always comes asking, she just wants our money. The words cut deep, as if my love for my son was greed. But I stayed silent, because I had no choice. Weeks later, I found out the truth. My brother's business was not bad. In fact, he had just bought a new car, a shiny one, parked proudly outside his house. I stood frozen on the street, staring at it, my chest burning with anger. He had lied to me, lied when I begged for help to save my child. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, thinking of his words, and his wife's whispers, and the new car shining in the streetlights. Betrayal. It felt like poison in my blood. The next day, when I looked at Ian, he smiled weakly and whispered, Mama, are you okay? And I forced a smile. Yes, my love, I'm okay. But inside, something broke. I had carried the weight alone for so long. I had bet my pride, swallowed my tears, and when I finally asked for help, I was given lies. Lies from the very people I trusted most. That betrayal planted something inside me. A dark seed. It whispered late at night. What if you stop being silent? What if you stop being kind? For the first time, I thought about revenge. Not for me, but for Ian. For every tear, I cried silently. For every night, I stayed awake, counting his breaths, while they bought cars and laughed at family dinners. The thought scared me. I was not that kind of woman. But betrayal changes people, and I was no longer the same. I began to plan quietly. At first, just in my head, what could hurt them the way they hurt me? What could make them feel the helplessness I felt? Each night, I wrote numbers secretly, bills, debts, amounts owed, and imagined taking from them the way they had taken hope from me. But danger lurked. If anyone found out, if anyone knew what I was thinking, they would call me cruel, desperate, maybe even insane. And then I would lose everything, even Ian. Still, the seed inside me grew. The first move came by accident. One day, while visiting my brother's house, I saw his business papers on the table, receipts, numbers, and something inside me whispered, Take it. My hands shook. I reached for one paper, slipped it into my bag when no one was looking. It was small, harmless maybe, but it was the first step, the first shadow of revenge. That night, I stared at the paper, my heart racing. I knew I had crossed a line, a dangerous line, but I also knew this was only the beginning. That small piece of paper burned in my bag. It was just numbers, receipts, but it felt heavier than stone. Each time I looked at it, I remembered his lies, his car, his wife's whispers, and the way he shut the door on me when I begged for help. Revenge grew louder in my heart. It whispered, "If they will not help you, take what is yours." But each time I looked at Ian, my chest tightened. What if I lost myself? What if he grew up one day and saw his mother as a thief? I tried to throw the paper away. I held it above the fire, but my hand froze because I couldn't let go. At the hospital, bills kept coming. The doctor said Ian needed stronger medicine now. Something rare, something more expensive. He placed the prescription in my hand, and my knees went weak. The cost was more than a month's salary. I wanted to scream, to tear the paper apart, but Ian was there, holding my hand, looking at me with those trusting eyes. "Mama, can I get better now?" And I forced a smile. "Yes, my love, you will." That night, I sat in the dark, the paper from the hospital in one hand, the paper from my brother's business in the other, and I whispered to myself, maybe this is the way. I began studying the numbers. It wasn't easy. I was no accountant, but I saw patterns, big earnings, small lies, hidden profits he never spoke of to anyone, and then I saw it. A weakness, a way to move money, quietly, from him to me. My heart raced. The thought terrified me, but also gave me strength. Strength I hadn't felt in months. The next day, I went to my brother's office. He wasn't there, only his assistant, and when her back was turned, I slipped another paper into my bag, this one more important than the first. Each step I took was dangerous. Each lie I told risked everything. If anyone found out, if anyone guessed what I was doing, I would lose my family, my job, maybe even my son. But the need was greater than the fear, because what is morality when a child's life hangs in the balance? At night, when Ian slept, I wrote secret notes, copied numbers, planned quietly by candlelight. Every detail mattered. One mistake could destroy me, but one success could buy my son another day of life. Still, guilt haunted me. Sometimes I saw my mother's face in my mind, her voice whispering, "This is not who I raised you to be." But then I saw Ian's face, pale, tired, his little chest rising slowly in sleep, and I answered back, "This is who I must be." The first time I used the plan, my hands shook so badly, I thought I would faint. I signed a paper quietly, shifted numbers from one column to another, just enough to hide in plain sight, just enough to buy Ian's medicine. When the pharmacist handed me the medicine, and I saw Ian smile as he took it, relief washed over me. For a moment, I felt like a hero. But heroes don't steal, do they? I pushed the thought away, because my child was breathing easier that night, and that was all that mattered. Days passed. The medicine helped. Ian laughed again, just a little. He played with his toy car, and whispered, "Mama, maybe we can go to the sea soon?" I smiled through tears. Yes, my love, soon. But my relief didn't last, because lies have shadows, and revenge always demands a price. At the next family gathering, my brother looked at me strangely, his eyes sharp, suspicious, and he asked casually, "How do you manage all the hospital bills, sister? Your salary is not that big." My throat went dry. I forced a laugh. "I save. I work extra hours." But his eyes narrowed, and I knew he didn't believe me. That night, fear kept me awake. What if he discovered the truth? What if the numbers betrayed me? What if I lost everything? I looked at Ian sleeping peacefully beside me, and whispered to myself, "I will risk it all. I will risk myself, but not him." The seed of revenge had become roots now, deep inside me, holding me tight, and I knew there was no turning back. The days after that family gathering felt heavy. Every time the phone rang, every time there was a knock at the door, my heart jumped with fear. Was it him? Did he find out? But nothing came, only silence, only suspicion hanging in the air like smoke. I walked through life with two faces. At the hospital, I was the loving mother. At work, I was the quiet employee. But at night, I was something else. A woman with papers spread across the table. Numbers, plans, lies hidden inside lines of ink. Each time I shifted money, I told myself it was the last time, that I would stop once I had enough. But enough never came, because the bills never stopped. And Ian's medicine was only the beginning. One night, as I sat by his bed, he coughed in his sleep, a deep, painful cough, his small hand clutching the blanket tightly. I held him close, tears running down my face, and I whispered, "Forgive me, my love, forgive what I've become. I'm only trying to save you." The guilt grew heavier, but so did the need. At work, I asked for extra shifts, but my boss refused sharply. You can barely handle your hours now. His words stung, but maybe he was right, because my mind was no longer in my work. It was in numbers in shadows. One evening, while going through my brother's office again, I almost got caught. The assistant walked in suddenly. I hid the papers quickly under my arm and smiled weakly.
Oh,
I was just leaving these here for him. Her eyes lingered on me too long, and I felt her suspicion cut like a blade. That night, I couldn't breathe. I imagined her telling him. I imagined my brother storming into my house, throwing accusations in my face, tearing apart the fragile walls of secrecy I had built. But the next day came, and nothing happened. No calls, no accusations, only silence again. But silence was worse, because silence meant the storm was coming, and I didn't know when. At home, I noticed my tiredness. "Mama, why do you always look scared?" he whispered one night. I froze. How could I answer? How could I tell him the truth? I stroked his hair gently and whispered, "Because I don't want to lose you." He smiled softly. "You'll never lose me, Mama. I'll stay with you forever." His words cut into me, because forever no longer felt like a promise. It felt like a question. The hospital bills doubled again. New treatments, new machines. The doctor's voice was calm, but his eyes were heavy, as if even he knew the fight was becoming harder. And me? I sank deeper. Each step into revenge pulled me farther from who I once was, but closer to keeping my son alive. One evening, I overheard my brother on the phone. I had gone to his office again, hidden in the corner. He spoke loudly, angrily. "Money is missing. The numbers don't match. Someone is making a fool of me." My blood froze. My hands went cold. He knew. Maybe not me yet, but he was close. I slipped away quietly, my legs shaking, my heart pounding louder than my footsteps. That night, I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I sat by Ian's bed, watched his thin chest rise and fall, and whispered again, "If someone finds out, everything will fall apart." But what choice did I have? Stop now and lose the medicine? Continue and risk losing myself completely? The war inside me raged. Love against morality, desperation against guilt. And the longer it raged, the more I realized I was already too deep. There was no way back. The next day, my brother visited me. He sat at my table, looked me straight in the eyes, and asked calmly, "Are you hiding something from me?" My hands trembled, but I forced myself to shake my head. "No, nothing." He studied my face, as if searching for cracks, then leaned back in his chair and whispered coldly, "Because someone is stealing from me, and when I find out who it is, they will regret it." His words lingered in the air long after he left. Heavy, sharp, suffocating. I collapsed to the floor after he was gone, shaking, crying, because I knew the storm was almost here. The air in my house was heavy. Every sound, every silence felt dangerous, like the walls themselves were watching me. After my brother's warning, I moved with more care. I hid every paper, every receipt, every trace. I memorized numbers instead of writing them down, because one single mistake could destroy everything. But no matter how careful I became, I could feel it, his eyes on me, the doubt in his voice, the weight of suspicion in every visit. One evening, I found him waiting outside the hospital. He leaned against his car, arms crossed, and when he saw me, he said quietly, "Funny, how you always seem to have money now." My heart stopped. I forced a smile. "It's from extra work. I've been saving." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, but I could see it. He didn't believe me. Not fully. That night, I broke down, cried into my pillow, because the walls were closing in, the lies were too many, the cracks too deep. But then I heard Ian coughing again. I ran to him, held him close, felt his small body trembling in my arms. And I knew, no matter the cost, I couldn't stop now. The next morning, I made my biggest move yet. I created false invoices, numbers that looked real, signatures that looked perfect. I shifted more money in one night than I had in weeks. When I finished, my hands shook so badly, the pen almost slipped from my fingers, and I whispered to myself, "This is madness." But madness was the only way left. Days passed, and the money kept Ian's treatments alive. He grew a little stronger, smiled a little more, held my hand tighter when we walked to the park. And for those small moments, I told myself it was worth it. Until the letter came, a letter from the bank, not addressed to me, but to my brother. It had been delivered to my house by mistake. I stared at it for a long time, my hands sweating, my heart pounding. Should I open it? If I didn't, what if it contained the truth? If I did, what if it contained proof I was already caught? Finally, with shaking fingers, I tore it open. Inside were numbers, statements, warnings. large amounts missing, marked in red ink, and a final line that made my blood run cold. Fraud investigation pending. I dropped the paper. My body froze. My breath caught in my throat. Fraud investigation. That meant police. That meant exposure. That meant prison. I clutched the table to stop myself from falling and whispered to the empty room, "No, this can't be happening." That night, I couldn't look at Ian because every time I did, I saw the risk. I saw myself taken away. I saw him alone. I knew I had to act fast, hide more, cover deeper, but the hole was already too big, the lies too wide, the storm too close. A few days later, my brother stormed into my house, his face red with rage. He slammed the bank letter on the table and shouted, "Do you know anything about this?" My lips trembled. I tried to deny, but the words barely came out. I don't know." His eyes narrowed. He stepped closer and whispered with venom, "Don't lie to me. I can smell guilt all over you." Tears spilled from my eyes, but I shook my head weakly. "I swear, I don't know." He stared for a long time, then finally left, slamming the door so hard, the whole house shook. I collapsed to the floor again, shaking violently, because I knew the truth. He was only one step away from finding out. That night, I sat by Ian's bed again, stroking his hair and whispering, "If I go to prison, what will happen to you?" The fear was unbearable, the walls closing tighter, the world turning darker, every breath heavier. But in that darkness, a seed of something else grew, not just fear, but anger. Anger at my brother, at his wealth, at his coldness, at how he sat in comfort, while my son fought for his life. And in that anger, revenge burned hotter. This wasn't only about survival anymore. It was about making him feel the pain I felt, the fear I lived with every day. And so, as I wiped my tears, I whispered to myself, "It's time. He will feel what I feel." The storm I had feared finally arrived, and I realized something. If I waited, I would be destroyed. But if I acted, maybe I could win. For days, my brother circled me. Questions, visits, suspicious eyes. He was close to finding proof. Too close. And I knew, the next time he asked, I wouldn't be able to lie anymore. So I made a choice. A dangerous one. I decided to hit first. I went back into his office one night. The same place where it had all started. But this time I wasn't just taking. I was planting evidence. Planting lies. Planting poison in numbers he trusted. If they investigated, I wanted them to see his name, not mine. My hands shook as I worked, changing signatures, switching receipts, leaving a trail that pointed to him. Every stroke of the pen, every line of ink, felt like a dagger in my chest. But I forced myself to keep going, because I had no other way out. When I finished, I sat in his chair, in the dark office, and whispered to myself, "You wanted war? Now you'll have it." The next day, he came to my house again. This time his voice was sharper. "Do you know how much money is missing now? Do you think I'm a fool?" I looked straight at him and whispered, "Maybe you should check your own books more carefully." His face rose, his jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw doubt in his eyes. Doubt not about me, but about himself. That night, I almost broke. I almost told him everything, begged for forgiveness. But then Ian coughed again, his little voice whispering, "Mamas, don't cry." And I knew I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when his life was still hanging by a thread. The following week, the investigators arrived, men in suits, carrying files, carrying suspicion. They entered his office, not mine, and I watched from the corner, my hands sweating, my heart racing. They asked him questions. They showed him papers. Papers I had touched. Papers I had poisoned. And his face turned pale. His voice stammered. I don't know how this happened." They didn't believe him. Not fully. And I felt something dark inside me. A cruel satisfaction. For the first time, it wasn't me under the light. It was him. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, my reflection broken by tears, and whispered, "You said the thief would regret it. Now it's you." But revenge doesn't end so easily. Because when he left the investigator's office, he came straight to me. He slammed my door shut, his eyes wild, and hissed, "This isn't over. I know it's you." I froze, but forced myself to whisper, "Then prove it." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. We stared at each other, two siblings, two enemies, bound by blood, broken by lies. Finally, he left, his footsteps heavy, his shadow still burning in my house. I collapsed after he was gone, sobbing, because the truth was, he was right. It was me. And yet, he had no proof, Only suspicion. But suspicion was dangerous. Because suspicion grows. And suspicion destroys. The next morning, I woke up to Ian's laughter. Soft, fragile, but real. For one moment, one small moment, it felt like everything was worth it. But deep inside, I knew the truth. This was only the beginning of the end. The walls of my brother's empire began to shake. Whispers spread in his office. The investigators came back again. Each time with sharper questions. Each time with colder eyes. I watched from a distance, silent, invisible. As the net closed around him, the net I had created with my own hands. At home, I held Ian close. His laughter filled the room. But inside me, there was no peace. Only fire, only fear. Because I knew, if my brother fell, he would not fall alone. He would drag me with him, if he could. One night, he came again. But this time, he wasn't shouting. He wasn't angry. He was broken. He sat at my table, his hands trembling, his voice hoarse. They think it's me. They think I stole everything. I stared at him, silent. Because what could I say? That I had done it. That I had put this fire under his feet? He covered his face with his hands and whispered, "They want to take me to court, to prison. I could lose everything." A long silence filled the room. Then I heard my own voice, cold, sharp. "Now you know how it feels." His head shot up, his eyes wide. "What did you say?" Tears burned in my eyes. But the words kept coming. "You sit in your palace, counting your money, while my son fights for his life. Do you know what that feels like?" His face twisted. Shock, anger, pain, all mixed together. You did this." My lips trembled, but I whispered the truth. "Yes." The silence that followed was heavy. He stood slowly, his fists clenched, his voice low. "You destroyed me," and I answered softly. "You destroyed me first." For the first time in years, there was no mask, no lies, only truth. Raw, burning, unbearable. He stormed out of my house, the door slamming shut, and I knew the war between us had crossed the line. There was no return. Days turned into weeks. The investigators pushed harder. My brother's name spread in whispers across the town. His business shook, his pride broke. But in the shadows, he fought back. And I began to feel his fire too. Small signs, small warnings. My phone ringing with silence. My papers at work shuffled out of place. Strangers asking questions too close to the truth. He was pushing back, hunting me, but quietly, carefully. It became a game of shadows. Him trying to expose me trying to bury him deeper. At night, I stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding, my breath shaking, and whispered, "This will not end without blood." Ian's health rose and fell. Sometimes he smiled. Sometimes he cried in pain. And each time I held him, I reminded myself, this is why I fight. But the fight was no longer just about him. It was about pride. It was about revenge. It was about years of silence, years of being smaller, years of being weaker. Now, for the first time, he was the one on his knees, and I was the one standing above. But victory tasted bitter, because every time I saw him broken, I also saw myself, and I wondered, had I become worse than him? The line between love and hate, between revenge and justice, had blurred completely. And deep inside, I knew the storm wasn't finished. The storm was only gathering for the final blow. The day of the final storm came without warning. No knock, no letter, just a shadow at my door. Heavy, silent, unshakable. When I opened it, my brother stood there, his eyes dark, his face pale, his voice calm, too calm. "We need to end this, tonight." I stepped aside. He entered. The house felt smaller, the air colder, as if even the walls knew something was about to break. He sat at the table, placed a folder in front of me, and whispered, "Proof against you." My blood froze. My hands trembled. Inside the folder were copies of papers, numbers, signatures, some mine, some forged. He leaned closer and hissed, "You thought you were clever, but you forgot one thing. I know you." Tears burned my eyes. I whispered, "And you forgot one thing too. I know you." I reached under the table, pulled out my own folder, thicker, heavier, full of shadows I had planted, false invoices, false trails, and pushed it toward him. "Proof against you." For a long moment, we stared at each other. Two weapons on the table, two lives hanging by thin strings. Then he laughed, a sharp, broken laugh. "This is madness," I answered softly. "No, this is survival." His laughter died. His eyes filled with rage. "You ruined me," and I shot back. "You left me no choice." The silence cracked. Words turned into fire. Pain turned into daggers. He shouted, "You destroyed everything I built." I screamed back, "You let my son die little by little." The room shook with our voices, two storms colliding, two hearts breaking. Then, in the middle of the chaos, a soft voice broke through, "Mama?" We froze, turned toward the door, and there stood Ian, his small body weak, his face pale, but his eyes wide with fear. He had heard us. He had seen us, his mother and uncle, not as family, but as enemies. I rushed to him, fell to my knees, held him close, and whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He looked at me, his lips trembling. "Why are you fighting?" Tears poured down my face, because I had no answer, no word strong enough, no lie gentle enough. Behind me, my brother stood silent, his rage gone, his shoulders heavy, his eyes empty. For a moment, we were not enemies. We were just two broken souls. And in the middle stood a child, the only innocent one in this war. Ian coughed hard, collapsed into my arms, and I screamed his name, my heart tearing apart. My brother stepped forward, for the first time not with anger, but with fear. "Call the doctor, now." We rushed, together, forgetting war, forgetting revenge, only holding onto the fragile breath of a child. That night in the hospital, I sat beside Ian's bed, my brother on the other side, both of us silent, both of us shattered. Hours passed, machines beeped, doctors whispered, and still we sat. Finally, my brother looked at me, his voice breaking. "Was it worth it?" I looked down at Ian, at the small body fighting for life, and whispered, "I don't know." The war had no winner, only ruins, only scars. And as dawn came through the hospital window, I realized revenge is not fire. Revenge is ash. The days after the hospital felt like a blur. Long hours, white walls, the sound of machines. I sat by Ian's side every second, afraid to leave, afraid to blink, afraid to lose him. My brother came too, not every day but often. He sat quietly in the corner. No words, no anger, just silence, heavy and sharp. We never spoke about the papers, or the lies, or the war that had burned between us. It was as if those nights had never happened, but the scars remained, unseen, unspoken, but alive. Ian's health rose and fell like waves. Some days he smiled, some days he cried, but each moment reminded me how fragile life truly was. And as I held his small hand, I asked myself again and again, was it worth it? Was the revenge worth this pain? The truth, it didn't feel like victory. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like emptiness. Because even though my brother suffered, even though his name was burned with suspicion, I did not feel peace. I only felt guilt. I had destroyed his pride, but in doing so, I had destroyed myself too. One evening, as the sun set outside the hospital window, my brother finally spoke, his voice soft, almost broken. "I don't hate you." I turned to him, shocked, and he added quietly, "I should, but I don't. Maybe because deep down, I understand." Tears filled my eyes, because I understood too. We were both victims of pride, of silence, of choices we couldn't escape. We sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't war. It was something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a step. The world outside moved on, but for us, time stood still, between hospital walls, between breaths, between regrets. Weeks later, Ian smiled again, a real smile, stronger, brighter, and for the first time in months, hope returned. I held him close, whispered in his ear, "No more lies, no more shadows, only you, my love." And in that moment, I realized something. Revenge doesn't heal. Revenge only burns. And when the fire is gone, you are left with nothing but ash. I thought revenge would make me strong, but it only made me hollow. I thought it would protect my son, but in truth, it almost took him from me. Some scars will never leave. The shame, the guilt, the secrets, they will follow me forever, like shadows on my soul. But when I look at Ian, when I see his smile, I remind myself, this fight was never about winning. It was about love, and love cannot live in revenge. So I chose not to fight anymore, not to destroy anymore, but to protect, quietly, gently, even if it meant carrying the scars alone. Because in the end, revenge did not give me peace. Love did. And as I sit here, years later, telling you this story, I hope you understand one thing. Betrayal cuts deep, revenge burns hotter, but forgiveness, even the smallest piece of it, is the only thing that lets the heart breathe again. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. I would love to know how you felt. And if you've ever faced something similar in your own life, your words might give comfort to someone else listening right now. If you want more stories like this, you can subscribe and stay with us on this journey, but only if it feels right to you. Because sometimes stories are not just told, they are shared.